asked you, including me, a series of questions about articles you'd written, public statements you had made on social media that were, I have to say, pretty grossly partisan, and I thought offensive, and you and I went back and forth about it. After that, a number of us asked you questions for the record relating to these statements. I want to follow up on one of them. I, in particular, asked you to give us a full accounting of the public posts that you had made on Twitter. You had locked your Twitter account before you came before this committee. It had previously been public. I asked you to provide the public posts that had previously been available on Twitter because the ones that we have were pretty disturbing. You responded as follows, and I quote, "My personal Twitter account is comprised of posts about my mystery novels, events at the White House Historical Association, Pittsburgh sports teams, travels, and my dog," end quote. Is this an accurate statement?
Yes, Senator.
I just remind you, you're under oath. Is this an accurate statement?
Yes, Senator.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your Twitter posts then that I was asking you about. On February 18th, 2022, you posted on Twitter bemoaning the dropping of mask requirements for children, including those under the age of 5. Do you remember that post?
No, Senator. Those tweets were in my personal capacity.
No. I asked you, would you give all public posts that you had made on Twitter? You said no, effectively, and you said that your Twitter posts consisted of mystery novels, events at the White House Historical Association, Pittsburgh sports teams, travels, and my dog. And you just told me now under oath that you stood by that. So now let's talk about your Twitter posts. On February 18th, 2022, you posted bemoaning the fact that mask requirements for children under the age of 5, one of whom I happen to have, by the way, had been dropped. Is that a post about your dog or sports teams?
My social media is in my personal capacity,
Answer
Senator.
my question, please, because you've testified under oath that you only posted about your dog and sports teams and novels, and you also said you wouldn't give this committee any of your public posts. So, is your post on February 18th, 2022, bemoaning the lifting of mask requirements for children under the age of 5, who I might just ask all of the data has said is extremely harmful to children, these mask requirements? We'll leave that aside for now. Is that a post about your dog or sports teams? Yes or no?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
Yes or no, Ms. Shogan? You are under oath before this committee, and I have to say, you have placed this issue squarely in record by repeatedly refusing to answer. Yes or no?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
So you're not answering my question. Let's talk about another post. 26th of May, 2022. You talk about an assault weapons ban, retweet a post, ban assault weapons now. Say you agree with this idea that you have to be a certain age to buy so-called assault weapons in America. Is that a post about sports teams or your dog or mystery novels?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
What about the post on January 5th of 2021 in which you say that Ted Cruz ought to stay in his own lane and not worry about what's going on in Pittsburgh? This is a reference, I think, to questions he had about the certification of the last election. Is that a post about your dog or sports teams or mystery novels?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
What about the post, you remember December 10th, 2020, where you said that you were hoping that President Trump would have his vetoes overridden, and you agreed with the post that he was a weak policy president? Is that a post about your dog or sports teams or mystery novels?
My social media is in my personal capacity.
What about your post on January 5th, 2021, in which you speculated that President Trump would pardon himself next, participating in a conversation about the certification of the Electoral College? Is that a post about sports teams or mystery novels or your work at the White House Historical Association?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
What about the post? Do you remember this one? I said we seem to be having an incredible case of amnesia, but maybe you remember this one. This is from December 3rd of 2021, in which you advise an individual who goes by Meg on social media that the Library of Congress, you advise this person to complain about religious flags that have been planted on the grounds of the Library of Congress, and you say that they ought to be removed. And you go on to give this person advice about how to complain and have them removed. Do you remember that post?
My social media is in my personal
Do you remember the post?
capacity. My social media
remember
is
the
in
post?
my personal capacity, Senator.
I have to say, I have been here for 4 years in the Senate. I have never seen a witness stonewall like this before. Never. And I've seen a lot. This is extraordinary. Do you remember this post? December 3rd, 2021.
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
I mean, this is unbelievable. And you want to be the archivist of the United States. You lied to us under oath. You lied to us in your QFRs. You just lied to me a second ago under oath. And now you're sitting here stonewalling, not answering questions about public posts that you've made. Are you a lawyer, Ms. Shogan?
No, Senator.
Are you familiar with the Shirtliff case at the United States Supreme Court?
No, Senator, I'm not.
Well, in that case, the Supreme Court held that, in fact, it constitutes viewpoint discrimination for a government entity to remove religious flags from its property when it's opened up the property to allow other people to put flags on it. Exactly the question that you were addressing in your public posts on Twitter. You're giving legal advice, which you're not qualified to give, directly contrary to the United States Supreme Court. I just wonder, does this have to do with your view that you wrote about that the religious right is connected to the rise of anti-intellectualism in American politics? Is that why you said what you said about religious flags, that the religious right is a force for anti-intellectualism? Explain that to me.
No, Senator.
Do you stand by your comment that the religious right is part of the rise of anti-intellectualism in American politics?
Senator, that article was written. It was about how Republican presidents use common sense terminology to effectively communicate with Americans.
Yeah, in which you said that the religious right, the rise of the religious right is part of the rise of anti-intellectualism in American politics. I just point out that's the article in which you say anti-intellectual, the title is Anti-Intellectualism in the Modern Presidency, Republican Populism. Very nonpartisan. Dr. Shogan, I'm going to ask you again, will you give to this committee your public posts on Twitter? Will you make them available to this
My
committee?
social media is in my personal capacity.
Mr. Chairman, I have to tell you, this is the most extraordinary thing I have seen in my brief time in the Senate. I have never seen a witness blatantly lie under oath like Dr. Shogan has just done to this. We were talking just a minute ago, I think, about human trafficking with Senator Cruz. Is that right? Did I hear that right? And this has been a priority of yours, I think, in your work as U.S. Attorney. Is that correct? Fair to say?
Yes, Senator.
So you are on an advisory committee to the U.S. Attorney General, to Merrick Garland. Is that right?
Yes.
And you stated in your questionnaire that this advisory committee, and this is your quote, elevates the voices of U.S. attorneys in department policies. Have I got that right?
Yes.
And one of those policies is combating human trafficking, correct?
Certainly.
You have talked a lot about the importance of anti-trafficking efforts, and human trafficking, just so we're all clear, includes sex trafficking, of course, but also includes labor trafficking. Is that right?
That's right, Senator.
And you probably prosecuted some of these cases. Is that correct?
I have been involved in allegations of forced labor.
Yeah.
Cases involving allegations of forced labor.
Understood. So when we're talking about labor trafficking, we're also talking about kidnapping and human smuggling across the southern border. Is that right?
Cases of forced labor can certainly involve those types of activities.
So the New York Times reported just a month or two ago this fact, and I'm going to quote now from the Times. Migrant smuggling on the U.S. southern border has evolved over the past 10 years from a scattered network of freelance coyotes into a multi-billion dollar, that's a billion with a B, multi-billion dollar international business controlled by organized crime, including some of Mexico's most violent drug cartels. And then the Times goes on to report about the cartels kidnapping children so that illegal immigrants can try to pose as asylum-seeking families. We've heard reports about women being abducted and raped as part of illegal immigration rings. We hear about cartels kidnapping and torturing other people, holding them for ransom until their relatives in the U.S. pay to have them released, and then illegally smuggling them into the United States. I'm sure you're familiar with this. I mean, this is the work that you do. All of this is human trafficking. All of it is tragic, and all of it is increasing. So here's what I'm coming around to. I'm just curious about your work with the Attorney General. Are you advising him to crack down on human trafficking at the border? Are you advising him to enforce our immigration laws at the border to stop this terror that is occurring with women and children in particular, but frankly, involving all people, labor trafficking, sex trafficking? Are you advising him to this on this topic and to this end?
Senator Hawley, as a member of the Attorney General's Advisory Committee, I can speak to the fact that I'm on that and that we do, when asked, provide input of the United States Attorney's community positions on issues.
Has he asked about this issue? Has he asked about, given your expertise in trafficking, has he asked about how to stop the crisis of labor trafficking and sex trafficking at our southern border?
Well, certainly violent crime is a very high priority for the Department of Justice, and one that is frequently discussed.
But does he have a plan to stop the trafficking at the border? Are you involved in that? Have you been involved in any work to develop a plan to stop the sexual exploitation of women and children, to stop the exploitation of migrant workers into this country, to stop the exploitation of these vulnerable populations by cartels and organized crime? Have you been involved in a plan, developing a plan to stop that at DOJ?
And Senator, the reason I just want to be careful that I'm speaking to what I can talk about publicly, but of course I can't speak to deliberative or work product. But what I can say is that I have not been asked to weigh in on the specific issue that you have asked.
It's too bad. Go ahead.
However, as a member of the Department of Justice and as a United States Attorney, violent crime has been my top priority, and I have done much to try to address that.
Well, I'm disappointed that the Attorney General's panel has not looked at human trafficking, but I can't say I'm surprised, because this Attorney General and this administration, frankly, has turned a blind eye to the crisis at our border that comes at a very real cost, a very, very real cost that you know, because you've seen these crimes. You've seen